Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, what went wrong? What went most terrifically wrong? Let's put it that way in game one for the Wolves. And what are the keys for game two against a Steph-less Warriors team? It's all coming next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Thursday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves are back at it tonight following their game one debacle loss to the Warriors, debacle of a loss to the Warriors. Franchise record for least points in a half, no three-pointers in the first half, and had 1 point at halftime. It was brutal. And of course, the post-game pod was yesterday. Hopefully you listened to the postcast live or here after the fact on the audio feed with Jack and Luke. And then I talked about the game on the post-game pod. So today what I want to do is pull out the most concerning things upon a second look at this game and, kind of sleeping on it and thinking about it a little bit. What was most concerning and what are the keys moving forward? And of course, the news with Steph Curry now out for very likely at least a week. We'll talk a bit about that. How does that change the Wolves' strategy defensively? So we'll talk about all that today. We'll talk about the issues and then also the keys as we move ahead to game two. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. Of course, you could also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So I guess first the Steph news, which is, not a surprise based on him very quickly being ruled out of the game after he suffered the hamstring injury in the second quarter of the game against the Wolves on Tuesday night. But Steph Curry, the Warriors have now said officially will be reevaluated in 1 week. So that means he misses obviously Thursday, which was, I thought, kind of a foregone conclusion. He'll miss Saturday, game 3. And that would imply he would also miss Monday, game 4. So the reevaluation date would be next Wednesday. So yesterday, which would also be the day of game 5. So if the Wolves, find a way to win the next 3, which is obviously a big if, but if they win the next 3, then Steph could make his return game 5, which would be back in Minnesota following the 2 games in Golden State. And it would be potentially a closeout game. If the Wolves say they win 2 out of the next 3 and game 5 is that pivotal, series is tied 2-2 back in Minnesota, that could be would be a massive, kind of pivot point for this series. It always is in a, game 5 often is. And it always is in a series that's tied 2-2. So that's a week from now. What do the Warriors look like without Steph? We'll talk a little bit about that today. I do want to start though with my biggest concerns from game 1 or the things that were the biggest issues and what that can kind of tell us about what's most important for tonight's game 2. And I want to start with turnovers. And obviously the Wolves shot the ball terribly. So actually I'll address that quickly first. I said on the post-game pod on Wednesday that I thought for the most part, the Wolves shot selection was fine. And then they tried to shoot themselves out of stuff and it really kind of threw them out of sync. I stand by that. I think early in the game, the shot selection was pretty good and the looks were actually not that bad either. And then what happened was everybody was trying to be the guy to break the seal. And it turned into there were a handful of maybe ill-advised jumpers because everyone was thinking what I'm sure everybody watching was thinking. I know what I was thinking. They hit one, they'll be all right. And you kept thinking it would happen in late second quarter, then it was going to happen in the early third quarter. And it took a few minutes into the third before it finally happened. And so, Dante and Ant, and there were guys that were taking some of these ill-advised threes, and obviously those guys are capable of hitting walk-up threes from 30 feet like they do it with frequency, but they were they were ill-advised given the game situation. And so that was an issue. And then, as I said this on Wednesday as well, the shooting woes kind of bled into the rest of the game. And the Wolves defense that was so good in the first quarter, they held Golden State to 18 points in the first frame, kind of went by the wayside. It was actually worse after Steph left the game. And maybe there's something to like, hey, the game plan completely changed and now we don't know, everything's out the window because Steph's gone and we can't score. So the defense just didn't look the same as it did early in this game. The Wolves were not physical enough. All that is kind of interconnected. But to me, the turnovers were perhaps more concerning. And here's why. The first several months of the season, the Wolves were one of the worst teams in the league in turnovers, and they still weren't great, call it after January 1st, which is kind of, if you're new to the show, I kind of use January 1st. It's a nice, clean, calendar year starts here, obviously. But the Wolves really started playing differently, maybe the second week of January, if we're being real specific about it. They had that bad Pistons loss like January 2nd or 3rd or whatever. Shortly after that is when things really started to click. We saw DiVincenzo join the starting lineup prior to his injury. Randle started to play better prior to his injury. The Wolves got on the offensive glass a lot more, but the turnovers started to reduce a little for Minnesota. And they started scoring more in the fast break. Transition opportunities looked less clunky, and part of it was, I think, familiarity with personnel and Randle being more comfortable. This game was kind of a it was a reversion. Is that a word? It reverted basically the I don't know if reversion's a word. They reverted to what they were doing in November. That's what this felt like. And they had 16 turnovers. The Warriors had 12. Like 16 is a bad number. 12 is all, like it, but it's not like it was 20-10. It was 16-12. So only 4 more turnovers. But the opportunities the Wolves got, I mean, the issue is twofold, right? If you commit 16 turnovers, that means, any of those live ball turnovers, or excuse me, I said 16-10. The Warriors actually had more turnovers than Minnesota in this game. The Warriors actually had 18 turnovers. I was looking at the wrong column. The Warriors actually had 18 turnovers. Minnesota had 16. Okay, so Golden State turned it over more than Minnesota. But again, a lot of that is after Curry leaves the game and their offense is out of sorts, which we'll talk about. But the problem for Minnesota is it's still twofold. One, they turned it over 16 times, which gave Golden State some easier opportunities and also robbed Minnesota. Like one of the big advantages they had against the Lakers was they just shot the ball a lot more times because they turned it over a lot less and they grabbed a lot more offensive rebounds. Well, they only turned it over 2 less times than Golden State in this game, and 16 is still too many. And they got out offensive rebounding. Golden State had 18 offensive rebounds against the Wolves in game 1. Minnesota had 12 offensive rebounds. So they had ultimately shot 1 less field goal attempt than Golden State and shot 13 less three-point attempts. Obviously, they made actually 13 less three-point attempts as well, which is a crazy number that they both shot 13 less and made 13 less than Golden State. Is a crazy way to think about that. But the sheer volume of shots that advantage they had against LA was not there in this game. And so the more you turn it over, of course, you're not shooting on those possessions. You're giving a team the opportunity to run in transition, which who knows, they may try and do more of without Steph. I don't think they will. I think they'll just try and muck it up even more. But that is a strategy that teams that are missing their best scorer may try because look, hey, it's an easier way for us to score if we don't trust our half court offense. I don't think that's plan A for Steve Kerr. But it's possible. And then the other thing is the more you run, the more you're going against a defense that's not set. And in the case of Golden State's defense, it was phenomenal in game 1. It was very good in the regular season. It was great after the Jimmy Butler trade. Minnesota needs to score not in the half court. They need to generate some opportunities in transition against Golden State. That's going to be really important. We'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about keys to the game. But the point here is that the fast break opportunities the Wolves did get were completely out of sync. And there's plenty of examples of this. There was, I think, 2 bad Julius Randle turnovers in transition. There was 1 really horrific Reid turnover in transition. We saw Ant have a couple of awkward passes, and there weren't always turnovers either. Minnesota might have had 16 turnovers, but sometimes they were 3-on-2s that led to no shot and led to allowing the Warriors to get back and match up in the half court. And there isn't a transition opportunity or even a secondary break opportunity because the Wolves botched the open floor opportunity so badly. That was an issue in this game, was botching those fast break opportunities completely out of sync. And again, it looked like November. So if they can figure that out, and Steph-less Golden State team is going to turn the ball over, and they're going to miss a lot of shots. So they're going to give the Wolves live rebound opportunities to go back the other way. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And turnovers to give the Wolves transition opportunities. And rather than face Draymond Green and a set Warriors defense that's phenomenal and the best defense in the league post Jimmy Butler trade, get out in transition and get some easy buckets that way. I want to talk about a couple of other things from game 1, and then I'll give my overall keys for game 2. We'll talk a little bit more about the Warriors without Steph. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you just need to find the right talent to help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who can deliver incredible results. Or maybe you just want fast and easy hiring. Well, posting a job with Upwork is free and simple. And within a day, you can have multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork, UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Today's episode is also brought to us by our title sponsors at Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%, and that is great news for tonight. Wolves Warriors game 2 at Target Center. You know it's going to be jumping. It's a must win. Well, sounds dramatic, but I mean, like, look what happened to the Celtics. You really got to win game 2 at home. We're getting closer to tip off. As you listen to this, every second that ticks past, you're getting closer to tip off, which means the prices are actually going down over at Game Time. Their last minute deals can help you save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets. And it's not just sports either. Maybe it's concerts, comedy, theater. Plus, they're all in pricing, means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is exactly what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. Couple other things from game 1 that I really want to make sure to highlight. Talked about turnovers. We talked about fast break opportunities, which again, like, grand scheme of things, the Wolves didn't score a ton in transition. Neither did Golden State, but that's an area of opportunity for Minnesota. Another thing from game 1 that's, I don't want to call it a silver lining because there really wasn't anything super positive about this game, but something to keep an eye on moving forward that also went the Wolves' way in game 1 was scoring in the paint. And we saw how diminutive this Warriors lineup is. And who knows, without Steph, maybe that means we see more Jonathan Kuminga minutes. Somebody who's going to be a little bit more active, athleticism. He scored a bunch of the regular season. That's a possibility. All that to say, though, the Wolves won points to the paint handily, 52-28 in this game. 52-28. Now, that said, they were a -6 on the offensive glass. They were a -10 overall on the glass for the game. 51-41, Golden State out-rebounded Minnesota. So a couple things there. Chris Finch talked in the media on Wednesday about how physical the Warriors were with Rudy and what holding they got away with and how they were like pulling offensive linemen in football with how they were handling Rudy. Curious to see if that, if there's any adjustment made on the officiating. Obviously, we'll have a different crew for game 2. But also if the Wolves, if they handle it a little bit differently. If nothing else, it's activity level on the glass to match what they were doing points in the paint wise. And Rudy ended up with only 9 points in this game. And I thought, like, they only had the one. They actually posted him against Jimmy Butler. I think it was early fourth quarter maybe. And it felt like something like, hey, you don't do this every time down. But they're not going to double Rudy. Like, they're not going to. So, pick your spots, do it a couple more times, maybe run a set to try and get a lob for Rudy. And I know Golden State's cognizant of the lob possibilities. We haven't seen a Conley to Rudy lob in what feels like months. Could there be something else there? But the point is, they won points in the paint by 24. There's even more upside there. Like, other than Kevon Looney, like, these dudes are not, there's nobody that has size that they're playing. I mean, Quentin Post is big. He's not playing. He played, by the way, Post played 6 minutes and was a +14 in this game, but he didn't do anything. He had 1 defensive rebound, didn't do anything else in the box score. And he's more of a perimeter oriented big, but just in terms of sheer size, the Warriors don't have it. And the Wolves need to really lean into the ability to win points in the paint wise. But what impressed me so much about Golden State's defense, I talked on the postgame pod on Wednesday about how they force the mid-range shots so well. But the way that they switch and the way that they're, I say smalls or wings, but like that's really all they are. Everybody steps up and at least provides some sort of resistance at the rim. It's not true rim protection. I mean, Golden State had 2 blocks in this game. They're not, you don't have a 7-footer back there protecting the rim. But everyone's willing to be there and be physical and present a challenge to the Timberwolves at the rim, and at least make things difficult. That's a credit to Golden State. But at the same time, and Ant missed some bunnies early too, by the way. Like Ant missed on one possession, he missed 2 shots right at the rim. He missed a short shot, missed the tip in, the little putback. He tried to just kind of boop, and it just hit the front of the rim and fell off. There were multiple situations that played out that way, but that one possession was pretty indicative of how the Wolves were in the paint early. There's nothing to be afraid of in there. Kevon Looney might get a couple of blocks. That's it. Nobody else is blocking shots on this Golden State Warriors team. They're going to be physical, and you may or may not get a call, but it's true that the refs can't call everything, and somebody on the Warriors said that in media availability on Wednesday. I can't remember who it was, and it's true. They aren't going to call everything, but they also can't call nothing either. Like at some point, if you're getting downhill and getting to the rim and they're just being physical because they're smaller, so they're trying to get into you and just disrupt you, that's going to get called at some point. And Minnesota did have 2 more free throw attempts than Golden State. So I think just sticking with it in the paint is going to be huge for Minnesota. But that was a thing they did well in game 1, was scoring in the paint. And then my other takeaway was I actually just mentioned this, Warriors switching defense and how good Draymond was really at the point of attack, but how ready and willing everybody on that roster, everyone on the floor at any given moment for Golden State was to switch on the perimeter. But there were such clean switches. Like even like Buddy Hield was getting in guys' jerseys like 30 feet from the basket. It was crazy to watch how in sync. It was a lot like, actually, it felt like the Wolves, was it game 1 last year against Denver when it was like, whoa, what's going on here in round 2? I think it was, where Nikhil had that clip where he's guarding Jamal, 80 plus feet up the floor, Jamal Murray, all the way to across the timeline and just crowding him and making his life miserable. That's kind of what it felt like with Golden State. Like they were really that present at the point of attack, and their switches were so clean. And they just, that second line it was like a wall. Like you could maybe get past the first guy, but there'd be a switch waiting for you, and they're going to say, all right, shoot the 19-footer. But they wouldn't let you get into the paint easily, at least. And then once the Wolves did, they scored to the tune of, 52 paint points. There's no rim protection. And as I said a couple of times late last week, early this week, or I guess it would have been Monday, Tuesday on the show, the Warriors were the best in the league at deterring rim attempts by opposing offenses, but they were like 22nd in rim percentage for opponents. Opponents don't get to the rim, but when they do, they score because there's not a rim protector. So again, stay at it, draw fouls, get to the rim. You're going to make them eventually, just like the 3-pointers, right? Eventually they have to start falling. That was very impressive for Golden State in game 1. I think the key is to, again, stick with it if you're Minnesota. I want to talk about my keys for game 2. I do want to talk about Naz Reid, and I want to talk about the Warriors offense without Steph Curry. We'll do all that here next, and then we'll close the show. Today's episode of Lockdown Wolves is brought to us by our friends at OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. OpenPhone will let you manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads, so you never have to miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that's openphone.com, openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. If you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right. Keys for game 2. For me, I'm only going to hit this one briefly because I talked about it quite a bit in segment 1. Capitalize in transition. Do not go against a set Warriors defense as much as you can control that. Along with that, I alluded to this earlier. Well, Golden State was a pretty good transition defense. I think they were like around 9th or 10th in the league. They were in the bottom third when it came to defending off of live defensive rebounds. So they were really good at like guarding after turnovers and in general in terms of limiting opportunities. But when opponents tried to run off of defensive rebounds, they had some decent success. Golden State was, I think, 20th in the league in points per 100 possessions off of transition opportunities off of defensive rebounds. Now, the flip side of that is the Wolves were dead last in the league in frequency of running off of defensive rebounds, and they weren't great when they did do it. However, I think they could be better, especially when, like, say, Rudy's not on the floor. Get a rebound and go. And honestly, against this Warriors team, maybe when Rudy is on the floor, have him rim run, just set up below the rim, toss him the ball. He's got to dunk on somebody like he did in Game 5 against the Lakers. Transition opportunities, they have to capitalize on them, especially if they're going to continue to shoot bricks and if they're going to continue to be disrupted by the Warriors switching defense, by their zone, which is phenomenal. And they did a bunch of in Game 1, of course, as expected. And, Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler, guys that are physical and good defensively. My next key is Nas doing Nas things. I said in the crossover episode, the series preview that I did with Charlie Walter over at Lockdown Warriors, which was Tuesday's show, if you missed it, he asked me actually a question about Nas Reid before I could mention Nas. I was going to bring up Nas as my X factor for this series. X factor is a term that we kind of throw around too much, but what I mean in this case is the non-star player who will impact the series the most, and potentially the series could hinge on what he does or does not do. So by non-star, I mean not Ant, not Randle. You could even say not Rudy. Obviously, Rudy's not generally going to be a massive part of the offense, but I think he's a key part of the series. Nas Reid, I didn't think the Warriors had anybody that could really match up with him easily. And that continues to, or that came to fruition in Game 1. I mean, Nas was the best player on the floor for Minnesota, and it wasn't close. 19 points on 14 shots. Only Ant scored more points. It took him 22 shots to do it. Also, Nas hit 3 threes. Nobody else hit more than 1 on the Wolves. Nas also had 5 rebounds in 34 minutes. Was third on the team in rebounding with 5 boards. He turned it over a lot. Yeah, a couple were ugly. But the Warriors could not guard him with a 5, like their bigger guys, like Post, isn't going to guard Nas. It's just, they're not, at least not going to do a good job guarding Nas. And if they guard it with a small, I mean, Nas is a good post player. And I talked about this with Charlie on Tuesday. Like, Nas could take whoever into the post, especially a small. And if they guard him with the big, he'll just dribble past him, which he did do. He was 5 for 7 on 2-point shots in this game. So I think Nas just has to do Nas things. I mean, he played 34 minutes. Rudy played 26. And it wasn't foul trouble. The main reason was they were way behind and they needed offense. But Nas Reid, to me, is a huge factor in the series. And he's the guy that is the biggest, I think, matchup problem if you're the Warriors. Nas is the biggest matchup problem you got to deal with. And then my last thing is the Warriors offense without Steph Curry. It was bad in this game. I mean, after Steph went down, like, the Warriors had a 36-point third quarter. They had just a 19-point fourth quarter. And so much of that offense was some high volume Jimmy Butler stuff. There, the lucky bank shot from 3 is Jimmy Butler being Jimmy Butler, but also some tough mid-range attempts from Jimmy. And then also Buddy Hield getting hot. Not quite Game 7 versus Houston on Sunday hot, but Buddy Hield getting hot. And the Wolves have to basically guard Buddy Hield the way that they would have guarded Steph Curry. They have to treat him like he's Steph Curry because he's the only true, like, I would say, shooting threat with a repeatable shooting threat. Like, Draymond hit 4 threes. That's not happening again. Like, nobody else on the Warriors strikes fear in the heart of anybody when it comes to launching threes. Jimmy's obviously still the most talented scorer and will surely be the leading scorer on this team, sans Steph Curry. But most of his stuff is going to be hard fought in the paint, drawing fouls, mid-range stuff, Not as much in the paint anymore, more mid-range, short mid-range than anything else. He's going to make some, he's going to miss some, he's going to get to the line fine. But he was 2 of 8 on threes. Jimmy doesn't want to shoot threes. They'll run a couple plays to get him corner looks like they did early in the game. That's fine. But you don't want Buddy Hield scoring 24 on 19 shots. Buddy Hield was a plus 22 in this game, and the Wolves only lost by 11 ultimately. So the Warriors were a minus 11 in the 8 minutes that Buddy Hield did not play. He also had 8 rebounds. And as I mentioned, he was competing defensively for Golden State, which is really all they're asking him to do. So the Wolves have to treat him like they treat Steph. Probably put Jaden McDaniels on him to bother him with length. Buddy's not going to get his shot off in the same way Steph does. And ultimately, obviously, he's not Steph, as good of a shooter as he is. Podziemski, he's going to score a little bit. Jimmy's going to score. They may get Kuminga going. But, I mean, you look at this Warriors roster and look at their regular season scoring. Steph obviously leads the team in scoring by 6.5 points per game, higher than the next highest, who's Jimmy Butler, who only played 30 games with the Warriors, averaged 18 a game. Next is Andrew Wiggins. He's not on the team. Next is Jonathan Kuminga at 15 points a game. I mean, he's barely in the rotation now. He's playing. I mean, he was DNP Dean at the end of the regular season, start of the Houston series. Like he played 14, 12 minutes, something like that in game 1. And he was their next leading scorer. Podziemski was just under 12 points per game. Buddy Hield was 11 points per game, and he played in every game this season. They didn't have a consistent third scorer. It was Wiggins was the number 2 scorer before they got Butler, and Kuminga, the third scorer, was something between Hield and Podziemski and Kuminga. So, but like those guys are all between 11 and 15 points per game, and I don't think you're going to get 15 from Kuminga. If I'm the Warriors, I play Kuminga more. I don't think they will. I would if I were them. Obviously, Steve Kerr knows his players more than I know his players, and so there's lots of other stuff that goes into it. But I don't know why Kuminga wouldn't play more. If you're looking for a little more offense and you just look at some upside and a little bit of size and athleticism, that's the route I would go. But the key is if you could hold Hield down, make him have a bad shooting night, or at least make his life difficult, you're making guys like Gary Payton II and, Moses Moody, like these guys are going to have to score 10, 12 points if you're going to win. And if you're Golden State, you're going to win. So guard Hield like he's Steph and make somebody else beat you. The Wolves have enough physical defenders to throw at Jimmy Butler. You don't want to get Ant in foul trouble, early. I think I'd probably put Jaden on Butler and Nikhil on when Nikhil Alexander-Walker gets into the game, put Alexander Walker on Hield. He's going to fight through screens better than anybody. He's the Wolves' best screen navigator. Have the length of Jaden, try and bother Jimmy Butler in the mid-range. I think that could be a route Minnesota goes. So that's something to keep an eye on. That's all I got for this one. I watch transition, watch points to the paint, watch Naz Reid as an X factor, and watch how the Wolves guard Buddy Hield. After tonight's game, the live postcast over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, our guys Luke and Jack will have you covered there. And if you can't watch it live, you can find the audio right here on this feed. The next episode in the Locked On Wolves audio feed will be the postcast with Jack and Luke. I'll be back on Friday with the post-game podcast, talking all things Game 2. We'll break everything down. We'll do studs and duds and the whole thing. We'll set you up for the weekend. The Wolves play Thursday, Saturday, Monday. So Friday show, we'll talk about Thursday night's game. On Monday, we'll kind of bridge the gap between Saturday and Monday night's game and get you ready for the rest of the series. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. Of course, you can also watch in the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, this show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.